Hello, my world history students. Today is our second video lesson of the week. We are going to be talking about the Crusades. I know that we covered this topic before we left for break, but I want to do some review for you and give you some more detailed information about Christianity and about the Crusades. So we're going to be talking about three topics today. So besides the Crusades, we're going to be talking about what life was like living in the monastery for nuns and monks during medieval times. And also, we're going to be talking about the medieval cathedral. Do you remember when you guys built Lego castles and we had the serf homes and the plantations and the manors? Okay, so I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how cathedrals were built and how long it took to build them. Okay, so let's get started. The Crusades. The teachings of many world religions focus on peace and forgiveness. We've probably all heard phrases like turn the other cheek, which is a Christian doctrine that stresses not to seek revenge. The Arabic word salam means peace, and it is also used as a general greeting by Muslims. Islam is the religion to which nearly 2 billion Muslims belong. We talked about the Islamic religion, we talked about the Jewish religion, and we talked about Christianity. So those are the three major world religions at this time. When students begin studying about the Crusades, many are shocked to learn that they were brutal, religious-inspired wars fought between Christians and Muslims. For over 200 years they fought. How can religions that preach peace and forgiveness have been so cruel to one another? Let's look at a few reasons for the Crusades. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe that Jerusalem, a city in the Middle East, is a center of their religions. In other words, it's the Holy Land. Remember, Mecca is Jerusalem, which is the Holy Land for all three religions. King David brought the Ark of the Covenant there. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ occurred in Jerusalem. Christians began making pilgrimages or religious journeys to Jerusalem in the 4th century. Muslims see it as one of their holiest sites. It is the place where Muhammad ascended to heaven to receive the principles of Islam. And remember, if you are a Muslim, you are required to visit Mecca at least once in your lifetime. It was only a matter of time before the three groups ended up in conflict over this holy city. They all had claim to Jerusalem, and they all knew that controlling the city could yield all the power. Jerusalem was seized many times by different groups as far back as 600 BC. Do you remember what BC means? Control of the city bounced back and forth numerous times before the Crusades. Still today, Jerusalem and Mecca is being fought over, okay? It's one of the longest wars in the history of the world. In 1095, Pope Urban II rallied his Christian followers to lay claim to Jerusalem. It had been under control of the Islamic world for nearly 400 years at this point. When the Christian Byzantine emperor asked for help, Urban took this as a chance to free Jerusalem from Muslim control. Pope Urban called for a crusade, or a holy war, to wrest Jerusalem back in Christian hands. Urban promised protection from God. Many took up arms, and not just for the will of God. Fighting was in the blood of Western Europeans, and many were looking to battle. They painted crosses on their shields and took up weapons. Urban said all who died would have their sins forgiven. While this surely appealed to many, the thought of travel to a foreign land, battling for a righteous cause, and the possibility of acquiring new areas made the prospect alluring. So there was incentive to fight on behalf of Pope Urban and Christians, okay? The biggest thing was that they were promised absolution, or they were promised a direct ticket to heaven, basically. If you served in the Crusades, you were fighting a holy war on behalf of God. Therefore, God would be eternally grateful for your service, and you would be sent to heaven. And that was the main goal of Christians, was that you wanted to go to heaven. So for them, it was incentive enough. The First Crusade took place from 1096 to 1099. A land march was the only way to reach Jerusalem. So people traveled from France through Italy and Eastern Europe, and then through present-day Turkey. See if you can find Turkey on the map. Tens of thousands of people died fighting for their God. Some were innocent civilians. In 1099, Jerusalem was in the hands of the Christian world. But this was only the first. There were to be more crusades. A second crusade took place in 1147 and lasted just 2 years. Fearing the advances of Muslim forces around Jerusalem, the kings of France and Germany led forces to take Muslim-held cities near Jerusalem. Even after putting together a force of 50,000 Christians, the Christians were defeated at the siege of Damascus, ending the Second Crusade. About 40 years later, in 1189, a third crusade was called. Jerusalem had recently fallen back under Muslim control after being held by Christians for nearly a century. This time, three powerful Western European kings banded together. The kings of England, France, and Germany fought in the battles. Even with the combined strength, the Christian army only managed a truce. Jerusalem, therefore, remained under Muslim control, but Christians were permitted access to Jerusalem. There were 9 crusades in all. The Fourth Crusade saw the fall of Constantinople, once the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. Other crusades raged from 1208 to 1271. Without a specific focus, these crusades took on all foes that they considered harmful to the Christian faith. Okay? So not only were the crusades fought against the Muslims, they were fought basically against anyone who didn't believe in the Christian faith. Do you remember the Children's Crusade? See if you can think back on the Children's Crusade, and in our next Zoom meeting on Monday, tell me one fact you can remember from our study of that before we left for break. So what became of the Crusades? What are the effects of this war that lasted so long? Well, the results of the Crusades were captured lands, many lost lives, gained riches, and lots of cathedrals were built. And while it's hard to say that the Christians won, the Crusades did increase the spread of Christianity. Christians gained new knowledge from the Islamic world. Trade grew as Europe learned of unknown foods, fabric, and spices. They translated many books from Arabic into Latin. This information led to advances in medicine, geography, math, and science. So remember, even though we're fighting a war, we have to travel to a new place in order to fight it. And if we're traveling, we're bringing with us our culture, our food, okay, our ideas, our technology. Okay, so that is the spread. It's called the Columbian Exchange, the spread of ideas and goods across the world. The Iberian Peninsula, where today we find Spain and Portugal, has been under Muslim rule for nearly 8 centuries. Following the Crusades, Iberia came under Christian control. This period, known as the Reconquista, extended until 1491 and gave rise to the nations of Portugal and Spain. All right, so next we're going to get into what life was like living in a monastery during medieval times. What was life like for nuns or monks living in a monastery? Well, first let's define what a monastery was. A monastery is a building or buildings occupied by a community of monks or nuns living under religious vows. Nuns lived separately in a convent. They didn't intermingle, preferring to lead single lives. So if you are a monk or a nun, you are devoting your life to God. Everything you needed to live and survive was there for you in the monastery. You wouldn't need to leave. The focus was inwards on yourself and on the deity, not on the outside world. Monks and nuns spent their days doing many religious activities like praying daily, meditating, and reading holy books. Life was simple and quiet. Monks were some of the most educated people in all of Europe at that time, so many of them would work on translating and copying versions of spiritual work in other languages, like the Bible, for others to use. Nuns focused on helping the poor, needy, and destitute people all around them. They all worked together within the monastery or convent, and everyone did their fair share of the work. Some would grow food, wash clothes, clean the monastery, and take care of animals and complete repairs on the buildings. Monasteries were often called safe havens, and they were there to be a safe place for criminals, orphans, or homeless victims of the times. Many schools, orphanages, and refugee camps were established by nuns or monks, which greatly helped many people during the medieval times. Some of these institutions are in existence today, having stood the test of time. There are still monasteries all over the world where monks and nuns do live a silent life. All right, so cathedrals. We talked a lot about cathedrals, all the different parts of cathedrals in class. Um, so I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about how they were built and how long it took to build it, because technology wasn't what it is today. One of the cornerstones of medieval Europe was faith. And in the Christian faith, places of worship were extremely important. Sometimes these churches were massive and were called cathedrals. It was huge and very expensive undertaking to build these feats of engineering. But the mindset at the time was if you were building something for God, you needed to put everything you had into it. At a time when machinery wasn't an option, you needed specialized workers who were very good at what they did. Men who could build with rock, sculpt, do carpentry, do glasswork, and complete blacksmithing duties. Excuse me. They would have many men who worked beneath them while they oversaw their portion of the work. The most important part was the foundation. And in some cases, old foundations have been found that went as far underground as 25 feet. All of these tasks would take many years, and in some cases, centuries to complete. If you started a cathedral building project, you weren't likely to see it finished before you died. There was a high level of attention to detail. The funding was also an important part of the process. Bishops were in charge of raising funds for cathedrals. But what about the parts of the cathedral? First, there was the nave, where the parishioners sat in the congregation with wide aisles on either sides. The choir was the area where the choir sat. The presbytery is where the priest would conduct the mass, toward the front at the altar. The cathedral was divided into the nave and the sanctuary. The sanctuary was the half where you found the altar in the presbytery. So remember, from the last video, we talked about tithing. So the funds to build these cathedrals were mainly taken out of the tithing funds. So you had to give to the church, right? And so the money that the church accumulated, and they accumulated a lot of money, would help to build the cathedrals and to pay the workers. All right, so that's going to be it for the second video lesson of the week. I am going to show you some discussion questions. So if you're paying attention, you should be able to answer these. I would like you to grab your notebook and a pencil or pen so you can write it down. Okay. Can you see the whole thing? All right. So now is the time to pause the video so you can write down the questions. All right. Now, I know this week is a little different. We do not have our regular Zoom meeting on Friday because we are observing Good Friday for the Easter holiday. So instead of showing me your answers on our Friday Zoom meeting, I'd like you to show them to me Monday morning at 9:30 in our academic Zoom meeting. And you can also show me your CNN challenge sheet that should be filled out for the week. Remember, if you fill the whole sheet out Monday through Friday and you watch all the CNN 10 videos, you're going to be entered to win a gift certificate, okay? So do the challenge, do the discussion questions, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon on our Zoom meetings. Bye.